Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A History of American Higher Education, 3rd edition, by John R. Thelin. Narrated by Runnette. Publisher's note: this audiobook refers to figures included in the print and e-book editions of the book. Preface. A journalist, after completing a nationwide tour of American campuses, noted, "At every one of the 14 universities I visited, I was met with the remark, 'You have come to us at a critical moment. This university is just now in a transition stage.'" It's a statement that resonates with the uncertainties and changes that college and university presidents face in 2011. What may be surprising to contemporary listeners is that the remark was made a century earlier, in 1910, by Edwin Slauson when he was finishing the field work for his classic anthology, Great American Universities. Whether 1910 or 2019, an element of continuity is that our colleges and universities are constantly changing, both by accident and design. The temptation is for each generation of academic leaders to consider its own time to be the critical juncture. This historical myopia is especially evident to me when the crises of today are seen as surpassing those of an earlier period, especially in the recent past, such as 1981. One needs historical context to counter the egocentrism of present college and university presidents. As one who has been a faculty member and administrator at both endpoints in this more than 30-year span, my best estimate is that one reason the problems of 1981 seem manageable, perhaps even quaint, today is that colleges and universities survived a severe storm of financial and political problems, thanks to some remarkable displays of imaginative adjustment, academic soul-searching, and sound educational thinking. How bad were the good old days? The years 1978 to 1981 were a time when the staid Carnegie Commission on Higher Education made the sobering projection that about 25% of American colleges and universities were soon going to cease operation. A historical message, then, is that the problems facing American higher education in the present day are not necessarily unprecedented in their gravity. But this time around, the insights and priorities that might have led academic leaders to good solutions do not seem to be surfacing as well and creatively as they did in 1981. Troubling today is that for those who are seeking to understand and solve the problems now facing colleges and universities, there does not seem to be much inclination to seek genuine historical perspective about higher education as a lens. For example, in November 2010, the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Ed reported that Yale University's School of Management was going to work with India's Institute of Management at Kozhikode to train university leaders. The MBA was the model for setting higher education aright. As such, there was little indication that in-depth historical analysis would have an integral part in the kinds of readings and projects associated with an MBA-style curriculum. The problem, and unanswered question then, was what role the history of higher education ought to play in the education of future academic leaders. I resist invoking the academic adage attributed to George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. My hunch is that the real genesis of this bold claim was that a wise, pragmatic senior warned some lazy sophomores, "If you don't study for your History 101 exam, you will fail the course and have to repeat it." That sound advice was not quite as earth-shaking as Santayana's dramatic version. My modest argument is that colleges and universities are historic institutions, and this is a characteristic that warrants careful consideration for those who live, work, and even lead there. Consider, once again, the insights from a century ago, as journalist Edwin Slauson, himself a chemist, observed about the material and physical environment of higher education. But it is impossible to ignore history in dealing with the University of Pennsylvania. One cannot get away from it. All the walls are covered with it. The buildings are genealogical museums. Paintings, bas-reliefs, inscriptions, windows, relics, manuscripts, and similar memorabilia catch the attention of the visitor wherever he goes. Most established American colleges and universities share this legacy of architecture and artifacts. The irony is that often the most unhistorical offices tend to invoke historic motifs. Often it is the main administration building that is home for the relics and paintings, even though few presidents or board members have a deep grasp of the history of higher education. Reasonable doubt about the efficacy of history is kindled as one walks around and through a campus and pays attention to the people and values that are honored in the memorial plaques and naming of buildings. Sitting in the boardroom of a renovated historic administration building, the gallery of presidential portraits often are underwhelming and uninspiring. Why this lackluster impression? Perhaps it is because the patina of heritage wears thin and exposes merely an accumulation of mediocre quality oil paintings of old white guys sitting in high-backed chairs, wearing academic gowns with hoods and medallions that bring to mind lodge initiations, rather than serious ideas or excitement about education. The good news is that in recent years, a number of colleges and universities have dared to revisit their heritage with fresh, critical eyes. At Brown University in 2003, the president appointed a broad-based committee of faculty, administrators, and undergraduate and graduate students to investigate the university's history with regard to slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, an exploration that was indelibly linked to the university's namesake Brown family. This steering committee on justice spent 3 years researching and discussing the complex historical, political, legal, and moral questions posed by any present-day confrontation with past injustice. It led to the creation of a memorial that was no less than a living site of memory, inviting reflection and fresh discovery without provoking paralysis or shame. What was refreshing about this project was that it showed how the history of colleges and universities could be ongoing as a source of both renewal and rediscovery. It provided a welcome alternative to a widespread tendency for institutional histories to avoid or deny controversial episodes, and for present and future generations of the campus community to gain strength and purpose from the informed research and reflection. In a similar vein, there are promising signs that historians who are writing institutional histories are including and addressing characteristics that may today be unflattering. A good example is James Axtell's 2006 The Making of Princeton University, a history that ranged from Woodrow Wilson's presidency up to the early 21st century. Axtell was remarkably candid in noting that the Princeton of Wilson's presidency was intolerant of Jews and other religious minorities, as well as exclusive in its formal and informal restrictions facing women, African Americans, and those from modest income as students, as faculty, and as administrators. Yet the important sequel is that over time, Princeton confronted internally and externally these biases, and learned from them, ultimately, and continued changing so that Princeton enhanced both its academic stature and its appropriate commitment to equity and social justice. Brown and Princeton, then, have provided models for harnessing heritage in ways that are simultaneously thoughtful and useful for present institutional policies and practices. Resurrecting history to face all dimensions of the institutional past will, of course, require initiative and commitment, especially from a president and other academic leaders, in conjunction with grassroots ideas and energy from students and alumni. And although Brown and Princeton have led, by example, in showing how a college or university might replace superficial celebration of the past with a complex, timely presentation of institutional heritage, it will not necessarily be easy for other institutions to follow suit. This is because there are numerous problems facing even those presidents, board members, and alumni groups who wish to keep history vital in higher education. One disturbing development is logistical. Colleges and universities have been losing their institutional memory because dedicated, knowledgeable archivists often now have less and less resources, professional staff, and space for preserving the artifacts and records of campus life, especially in the realm of student culture. The justification for this shift in mission is that in an increasing information age, campus archives have been required to devote increasing time and resources to serve as custodians of official records and institutional files in both electronic and paper form. Meanwhile, photographs, yearbooks, student posters, and publications, sample student term papers, examinations, diaries, and memoirs from recent years have a shrinking space in the institutional memory. The bricks and mortar of colleges and universities are impressive, yet inconsistent in their ability to instill respect for the past. The emphasis on building and expansion is central to American higher education. One journalist noted in 1985 that more than 75% of campus buildings had been constructed in the previous 20 years, leading him to conclude that the true campus symbol for the tumultuous decade of the 1960s wasn't a picket line. It was a construction crane. This building tradition has meant that American colleges and universities are simultaneously major sources of historic preservation and major destroyers of historic buildings, as illustrated by George Washington University, which razed late 18th century row houses to create space for its office, retail, complex enterprise. Transformations in campus architecture are symptomatic of changes and problems in American higher education. A century ago, nationally famous architectural firms competed for the honor of being selected to design and build handsome campus environments. In recent decades, however, the trend has been toward what historian Gabe Brecklin called the drift from classical dreams to concrete realities. By the 1950s, campus construction at public universities often was determined by state agency low-bid contract guidelines. Today, campus architecture is large, but often neither inspired nor inspiring. The American campus has become a prisoner of its own success and growth. A century ago, it was praised as a beautiful, amenable place to walk and visit. Today, it is more likely to be about the hardest place for a visitor to find parking, and sometimes so large that students are not able to reach one side of the campus from the other during class breaks. A football stadium and basketball arena used to be built adjacent to one another in the heart of the campus, similar to metropolitan train stations. Illustrative of the transformation of the American campus away from being an integrative, cohesive environment in the 21st century is that campus design is more likely to resemble the logic of airports, with athletic complexes built far away from the campus core. The most disturbing aspect of the historical myopia of American higher education today is the belief by presidents and boards that if only they had more money, then their institutions would be great. Equally plausible is that with more money, the institutions would be merely larger, more complex, and less coherent. When gauged by the standard of the history of higher education from the 17th century to the present, the problems are more those of confused purpose than lack of resources. I gain reinforcement for this view from one of my favorite authors and books, the late Clark Kerr's The Uses of the University. Kerr had no fewer than 5 opportunities to write a new preface in which he could defend or amend the insights he made in his original work. In his final preface, published in 2001, he concluded that American higher education in the 21st century had become uncertain and unclear in its direction and mission. One manifestation of this institutional malaise has been shown during the past decade in the conventional wisdom of college admissions offices, especially at academically selective institutions. Annual increases in college enrollments nationwide have been accompanied by an even greater growth in the number of applications for undergraduate admissions that colleges receive. It is indicative of what has been called application inflation, in which college presidents ascribe to the belief that bigger numbers mean better students. As Eric Hoover has questioned, however, where are the signs that college officials have considered when is enough enough? Evidently, a number of colleges gain reflected glory in their record for denying even highly qualified applicants. It is a syndrome that is commensurate with the research arms race in pursuit of federal grants, pursuits that at some point become counterproductive and dubious in educational propriety. Illustrative of the unfortunate abuses of the syndrome is its encouragement of indulgent consumerism. High school seniors, for example, tend to be encouraged to apply to 10 to 20 undergraduate programs, a behavior made increasingly easy by the availability of Internet online common application forms. In addition to inflating and clogging the admissions and selection channels, this collective behavior most likely favors students who already have advantages in terms of college counselors and educated parents. It may help some colleges buoy their statistics and ratios in such rankings as those published by the U.S. News and World Report. On balance, however, it does little to increase genuine access, choice, and affordability to students from underserved constituencies. It represents a peculiar, furtive behavior on the part of established colleges and universities that begs the question of significant educational issues. How should we gauge the most significant historical changes that will have implications for the 21st century? I think that universities, contrary to a stereotype of being stodgy and belatedly mimicking companies and commercial organizations, have often led the way in an organizational transformation that is consequential for American life. The university model, in sum, has been increasingly attractive as a structural and legal arrangement for what once would have been categorized as commercial ventures. The truism used to be, why can't a college be run more like a business? On closer inspection, one finds that pragmatic entrepreneurs have discovered that the smart money opts for a business to be run more like a college, or more specifically, like a university. Often overlooked is that in legal and technical terms, all the designation nonprofit means is that an organization does not offer stocks and dividends to investors. Nonprofit status is relatively silent on matters of compensation and earnings. It is relatively easy to gain status as a 501c3 nonprofit tax-exempt entity. Hence, any enterprise, even remotely related to educational, scientific, and service-oriented activities, has a good chance to qualify as a privileged nonprofit entity. This has certainly been an attractive option for numerous enterprises associated with healthcare services and commercial applications of research and development. To suggest the flexibility of this legal arrangement, one might consider that even the National Collegiate Athletic Association enjoys nonprofit standing, despite its highly lucrative and commercial ventures into broadcasting and spectator sports. As a recent Stanford University study concluded, when it comes to gaining nonprofit status, the American model is that anything goes. The downside has been that universities are less distinctive and less special in how various levels of government treat them. If the institutional conduct in inflating admissions applications were not sufficiently suspect regarding college and university priorities, events of the past decade involving endowments or investments have suggested what truly is a world turned upside down. Or, stated another way, it has been a strange world in which university values about stewardship have been inverted so as to be wrong-headed. Almost 20 years ago, Yale's chief investment officer, David Swenson, wrote the influential book Pioneering Portfolio Management, with the interesting subtitle, An Unconventional Approach to Institutional Investment. According to Andrew Delbanco's 14 May 2009 essay review in the New York Review of Books, Swenson's principal case to his professional academic investment managers was that he had discovered no less than the formula to assure university endowments high yields with low risks. Indeed, this worked. For a while. Perusing the annual editions of the Chronicle of Higher Education's special almanac year by year over the past decade, one does indeed find a 3 or 4 year run in the middle of the decade when numerous universities reported annual enrollment growth of 10%, 15%, and even 20%. But look again. By 2008 and 2009, the double-digit numbers are intact, except that by these years they had turned from gains to losses. What is ironic in terms of sound academic values is that philanthropy and higher education, including the wise and sound stewardship of endowments, evidently has come to mean in the 21st century that it is imprudent for a university to spend 10% or 15% per year on academic improvement and enhancements to assure quality and affordability for students. Evidently, however, it is all right, or at least understandable and forgivable, for the same institution to lose 10% to 30% on its endowment through risky investment strategies. Are our universities off course in their gyroscope of values and priorities and goals when it is acceptable to lose a large part of the endowment due to greed and risk-taking investments, but off base and spendthrift when investing in the present and future by spending substantially more than the customary, albeit unworthy, limit of 5% spend down per year to solve problems and provide solutions to educational concerns? That is a dilemma of endowments and philanthropy for American higher education in the 21st century that calls out for historical complexity and context to shape present and future deliberations. One imperative for this brand of informed, rigorous self-scrutiny of development and endowment policies is the sobering fact, according to the New York Times in November 2010, that universities will be challenged to reconsider business as usual because donors have retrenched. One reason for this change in giving behavior is evidently due to a loss of confidence in colleges and universities, with the result that donors, especially major donors, ask tougher questions about institutions than they did when they trusted leadership throughout society. The kinds of enterprising organizational behavior founded in missions, fundraising, and endowments have yet another related significant consequence for the blurring line between educational and commercial activities in American higher education. An Achilles heel in large-scale academic research is that the private or commercial sector, as represented by pharmaceutical companies, has been able to evade a great deal of expense and risk. That situation has been allowed to persist because federally sponsored research usually directed toward university-based research centers has been well funded, leaving campus-based scientists to take on the burden of expensive, time-consuming, and precarious basic research. But the indefinite, generous support of campus research has become increasingly uncertain and fragile. Over the long run, this cobbled relationship of corporations and campuses has become harmful, or at least skewed, in that it obligates federal resources to projects that might be directed elsewhere within higher education for other goals. The most troublesome consequence is that these dynamics propel universities to act increasingly as if they were commercial rather than educational institutions. Writing a new final chapter for a third edition of the book was a welcome task. It was also challenging, because writing history close at hand has peculiar pitfalls. In this case, the recent past, dealing with issues and developments in American higher education since 2010, brings into historical context a concentration of significant issues framed by discussions found in abundant contemporary documents and data. After immersing myself in primary and secondary sources, I came to the observation that the years from about 2010 through 2018 have been, in large measure, opportunity lost for established institutions to anticipate problems. This includes a tendency for many college and university boards and presidents to allow innovations to turn, over time, into imitations. And they have paid dearly for failing to heed storm warnings of deep campus schisms. In contrast to this myopia, some academic constituents have shown remarkable innovation and resilience at the grassroots of teaching and learning, philanthropy, and financial aid, along with numerous programs committed to equity. I hope that the new final chapter, Chapter 10, by focusing on prominence and problems, brings attention to fresh initiatives and unfinished works in progress. Since some who are influential inside and outside colleges and universities have persisted in arguing that higher education should be run like a business, I have taken their message to heart. It has meant that when I undertook writing a new chapter in 2018 for this third edition, my readings and research leaned increasingly toward the economics of higher education. This has included attention to where the money comes from and where it goes, both at the campus level and at the state and federal levels associated with higher education as an enterprise. College and university presidents and their boards of trustees who have emphasized branding and commercialization brought my focus back to activities intended to generate revenues, such as online programs, research parks, product endorsements, and stadium construction. This strategy often has included reliance on big-time intercollegiate athletics as a source of prestige and revenues. When I started writing seriously about college sports as part of American higher education as a graduate student in 1969, I frequently was met with discouraging words on the grounds that the topic was marginal and relatively unimportant. I persisted in writing about the history and economics of college sports for several decades, both as an informed advocate and fair critic. By 2010, I thought I had exhausted the topic, and that numerous commissions and panels finally would lead to fundamental reform. I was mistaken on both counts, as intercollegiate athletics has surged in the importance and publicity it engenders in both positive and negative ways. A puzzle for me is why few American colleges or universities have dared to connect image and reality by acknowledging that intercollegiate athletics has become a central mission of the institution. Preoccupation with commercial enterprises and consumerism has perpetuated the belief by leaders that the problems of American colleges and universities are primarily financial ones. An implication is that more money would solve problems and put higher education aright. I have taken this logic into account to analyze the financing of higher education, with emphasis on disparities. I found that some of the most severe cases of scandals, professional misconduct, presidential firings, and uncivil campus behavior have taken place at academic institutions that are well endowed and have abundant revenues. In addition to lack of money, problems facing colleges and universities deal with essential principles and historic commitments. Issues of social justice, equity, educational opportunity, affordability, and inclusive heritage and education for citizenship are still central in going to college in American life in the 21st century. I have resurrected from 60 years ago the question and challenge posed by John Gardner. Can we be equal and excellent too? Gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and social class still call for attention as part of American colleges and universities. In the latest edition of this book, I hope that a combination of serious research, thoughtful listening, and informed discussion will remind a new generation of listeners that history still matters in shaping the appropriate character of American higher education. Introduction. Historians and Higher Education. A beleaguered public relations officer at a White House press conference once fended off a reporter's tough question with the arch quip, "Hey, that's history." The implication was that placing an issue in the historical domain destined it to the dreary insignificance associated with obsolescence. For politicians and journalists, it effectively closed the case. And since American higher education today is a formidable modern enterprise, academic leaders can easily overlook its past. However, my response is markedly different. For me, the discussion of timely higher education topics starts.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?